The Norse story, The Children of Odin, is brought to you by notaprofit.org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. The Children of Odin, Part 11, Section Roman 4, Chapter 7. Sigurd, at the house of the Nibelungs, he left Hindfell, and he came into a kingdom that was ruled over by a people that were called the Nibelungs, as Sigurd's people were called the Volsungs. Giuki was the name of the king of that land. Giuki and his queen and all their sons gave a great welcome to Sigurd when he came to their hall, for he looked such a one as might win the name of being the world's greatest hero. And Sigurd went to war beside the king's sons, Gunnar and Högni, and the three made great names for themselves, but Sigurd's shone high above the others. When they came back from that war, there were great rejoicings in the hall of the Nibelungs, and Sigurd's heart was filled with friendship for all the Nibelung race. He had love for the king's sons, Gunnar and Högni, and with Gunnar and Högni he swore oaths of brotherhood. Henceforward he and they would be as brethren. King Giuki had a stepson named Guttorm, and he was not bound in the oath that bound Sigurd and the others in brotherhood. After the war they had waged, Sigurd spent a whole winter in the hall of the Nibelungs. His heart was full of memories of Brynhild, and of longings to ride to her in the house of flame, and to take her with him to the kingdom that King Giuki would have given him. But as yet he would not go back to her, for he had sworn to give his brethren further help. One day, as he rode by himself, he heard birds talk to each other, and he knew the words they were saying. One said, "There is Sigurd, who wears the wondrous helmet that he took out of Fafnir's hoard." And the other bird said, "He knows not that by that helmet he can change his shape as Fafnir changed his shape, and make him look like this creature or that creature, or this man or that man." And the third bird said, "He knows not that the helmet can do anything so wonderful for him." He rode back to the hall of the Nibelungs, and at the supper board he told them what he had heard the birds say. He showed them the wondrous helmet. Also he told them how he had slain Faf, near the dragon, and of how he had won the mighty hoard for himself. His two sworn brothers who were there rejoiced that he had such wondrous possessions. But more precious than the hoard, and more wondrous than the helmet, was the memory of Brynhild that he had. But of this he said no word. Grimhild was the name of the queen. She was the mother of Gunnar and Högni and their half, brother Guttorm. And she and the king had one daughter whose name was Gudrun. Now Grimhild was one of the wisest of women, and she knew when she looked upon him that Sigurd was the world's greatest warrior. She would have him belong to the Nibelungs, not only by the oaths of brotherhood he had sworn with Gunnar and Högni, but by other ties. And when she heard of the great hoard that was his, she had greater wish and will that he should be one with the Nibelungs. She looked on the helmet of gold and on the great armoring that he wore, and she made it her heart's purpose that Sigurd should wed with Gudrun, her daughter. But neither Sigurd nor the maiden Gudrun knew of Grimhild's resolve. And the queen, watching Sigurd closely, knew that he had a remembrance in his breast that held him from seeing Gudrun's loveliness. She had knowledge of spells and secret brews. She was of the race of Borghild, whose brew had destroyed Sinfiotli's life, and she knew that she could make a potion that would destroy the memory Sigurd held. She mixed the potion. Then one night, when there was feasting in the hall of the Nibelungs, she gave the cup that held the potion into the hands of Gudrun, and bade her carry it to Sigurd. Sigurd took the cup out of the hands of the fair Nibelung maiden, and he drank the potion. When he had drunk it, he put the cup down, and he stood amongst the feasters like a man in a dream. And like a man in a dream he went into his chamber, and for a day and a night afterwards he was silent, and his mind was astray. When he rode out with Gunnar and Högni, they would say to him, "What is it thou hast lost, brother?" Sigurd could not tell them. But what he had lost was all memory of Brynhild the Valkyrie in the house of flame. He saw Gudrun, and it was as though he looked upon her for the first time. Soft were the long tresses of her hair, soft were her hands, her eyes were like wood flowers, and her ways and her speech were gentle. Yet was she noble in her bearing, as became a princess who would come into a kingdom. And from the first time she had seen him upon Grani, his proud horse, and with his golden helmet above his golden hair, Gudrun had loved Sigurd. At the season when the wild swans came to the lake, Gudrun went down to watch them build their nests. And while she was there Sigurd rode through the pines. He saw her, and her beauty made the whole place change. He stopped his horse and listened to her voice as she sang to the wild swans, sang the song that Verlund made for Alvit, his swan, bride. No more was Sigurd's heart empty of memory. It was filled with the memory of Gudrun as he saw her by the lake when the wild swans were building their nests. And now he watched her in the hall, sitting with her mother embroidering, or serving her father or her brothers, and tenderness for the maiden kept growing in his heart. A day came when he asked Gunnar and Högni, his sworn brethren, for Gudrun. They were glad as though a great fortune had befallen them. And they brought him before Giuki the king, and Grimhild the queen. It seemed as if they had cast off all trouble and care, and entered into the prime of their life and power. So greatly did the king and the queen rejoice at Sigurd's becoming one with the Nibelungs through his marriage with Gudrun. When Gudrun heard that Sigurd had asked for her, she said to the queen, "Oh, my mother, your wisdom should have strengthened me to bear such joy. How can I show him that he is so dear to me? But I shall try not to show it, for he might deem that there was no sense in me but sense to love him. So great a warrior would not care for such love. I would be with him as a battle, maiden." Sigurd and Gudrun were wed, and all the kingdom that the Nibelungs ruled over rejoiced. And Queen Grimhild thought that though the effect of the potion she gave would wear away, his love for Gudrun would ever fill his heart, and that no other memory would be able to find a place there. Section Roman 4, Chapter 8. How Brynhild was won for Gun, are now that Sigurd had wed Gudrun, he was one with the Nibelungs. The hoard that was in Fafnir's cave he brought away, and he left it in their treasure house. He went into his foster-father's kingdom again, and he saw King Alv and Hiordis, his mother. But he had no memory now of the House of Flame, nor of Brynhild, who waited there for him. King Giuki died, and Gunnar, Sigurd's sworn brother, became king in his stead. His mother would have him wed, but Gunnar told her he had seen no maiden whom he would choose for his wife. But when Sigurd and he were together Gunnar would speak of a maiden far away, one whom he often thought on. And one day when Sigurd pressed him to tell who this maiden was, he spoke of one whom the wisest of the poets told of, a maiden in a hall with a flame around it, a maiden named Brynhild, who was guarded by a ring of fire. Sigurd laughed to think that his shrewd brother was beguiled by one whom he had only heard of. But if he was beguiled by the tale of her, why should he not come to her and wed her? So Sigurd said. Then Gunnar bent to him, and asked Sigurd would he aid him to win her, and Sigurd took Gunnar's hand and swore that he would. So they started off for Hindfell, Gunnar and Högni and Sigurd. They rode on until they came in sight of the black walls with the mounting and circling fire around them. No memory had Sigurd of the place. With the flame of eagerness upon his stolid face, Gunnar went forward to ride through the ring of fire. He brought Godi, his horse, near the flame, but the horse for no urging would go through it. Then Gunnar thought that, mounted on Grani, Sigurd's horse, he could ride through the ring of fire. He mounted Grani and came near to the flaring wall, but Grani, knowing that the one who rode him had fear of the fire, reared up and would not go through it. Only with Sigurd on his back would Grani go through the flame. Then were the three sworn brethren greatly discomfited. But after they had considered it for long, Högni the wise said, "There is a way to win Brynhild, and that is for Sigurd to change shapes, by the magic of his helmet, with Gunnar. Then Sigurd could ride Grani through the wall of flame, and come to Brynhild in Gunnar's shape." So spoke Högni the wise, and when he saw his sworn brother's gaze fixed on him in pleading, Sigurd could not but agree to ride through the flame, and come to Brynhild in the way he said. And so, by the magic of his helmet, he changed shapes with Gunnar. Then he mounted Grani and rode to the wall of flame. And Grani, knowing that the one he bore was without fear, rode through the flaring fire. Then Sigurd came into the courtyard of the house of flame. He dismounted from Grani, and he bade his horse be still. He went within the hall, and he saw one with a bow in her hands shooting at a mark. She turned to him, and he saw a beautiful and stern face, with coils of wondrous, bright, gleaming hair and eyes that were like stars in an unventured in sea. He thought that the arrow in her hands had been shot through him, but it was not so. Brynhild threw down the bow and came to him with that walk of hers that was as of one moving above the earth. And when she came near and looked upon him, she uttered a strange cry. "Who art thou?" she said. "Who art thou who hast come to me through the wall of flaring fire?" "Gunnar, son of Giuki, of the race of the Nibelungs," Sigurd said. "Art thou the bravest one in the world?" she asked. "I have ridden through the wall of flaring fire to come to thee," Sigurd answered. "He who has come through that wall of flaring fire may claim me." Brynhild said, "It is written in the runes, and it must be so. But I thought there was only one who would come to me through it." She looked at him, and her eyes had a flame of anger. "Oh, I would strive with thee with warrior, weapons," she cried. Then Sigurd felt her strong hands upon him, and he knew that she was striving to throw him. They wrestled, and each was so strong that none could move the other. They wrestled, Sigurd the first of heroes, and Brynhild, the Valkyrie. Sigurd got her hand in his in the wrestle. On that hand was a ring, and Sigurd bent back the finger and drew it off. It was Andvari's ring, the ring he had placed on her finger. And when the ring was taken off it, Brynhild sank down on her knees like one that was strengthless. Then Sigurd lifted her in his arms and carried her to where Grani, his horse, was waiting. He lifted her across his horse, and he mounted behind her, and again he rode through the wall of flame. Högni and Gunnar were waiting, Gunnar in Sigurd's shape. Brynhild did not look upon them, but covered her face with her hands. Then Sigurd took back his own shape, and he rode before Gunnar and Högni to the hall of the Nibelungs. He went within, and he found Gudrun his wife playing with Sigmund, his little son, and he sat beside her, and he told her of all that had befallen, how, for the sake of the sworn brotherhood, he had won Brynhild the Valkyrie for Gunnar, and how he had striven with her and had overcome her, and had taken off her finger the ring that he now wore upon his own. And even as he spoke to his wife, the fume of the potion that Gudrun's mother had given him was wearing off, and he had memories of going to the house of flame on a day that was not this day, and of riding through the wall of fire in his own shape. And again, as on the night when he drank the potion that Queen Grimhild brewed, he became as one whose wits are astray. He stood watching his child as he played, and his wife as she worked at her embroidery, and he was as a man in a dream. While he was standing there, Gunnar and Högni came into the hall of the Nibelungs, bringing Brynhild with them. Gudrun rose up to welcome her, who came as her brother's bride. Then did Sigurd look on Brynhild, and then did he remember all. And when he remembered all, such a mighty sigh rose from his heart, as burst the links of the mail that was across his breast. Section Roman 4, Chapter 9. The death of Sigurd. It happened one day that Brynhild, Gunnar's wife, now a queen, was with Sigurd's wife, bathing in a river. Not often they were together. Brynhild was the haughtiest of women, and often she treated Gudrun with disdain. Now as they were bathing together, Gudrun, shaking out her hair, cast some drops upon Brynhild. Brynhild went from Gudrun. And Sigurd's wife, not knowing that Brynhild had anger against her, went after her up the stream. "Why dost thou go so far up the river, Brynhild?" Gudrun asked. "So that thou mayst not shake thy hair over me," answered Brynhild. Gudrun stood still, while Brynhild went up the river like a creature who was made to be alone. "Why dost thou speak so to me, sister?" Gudrun cried. She remembered that from the first Brynhild had been haughty with her, often speaking to her with harshness and bitterness. She did not know what cause Brynhild had for this. It was because Brynhild had seen in Sigurd the one who had ridden through the fire for the first time, he who had awakened her by breaking the binding of her breastplate and so drawing out of her flesh the thorn of the tree of sleep. She had given him her love when she awakened on the world, but he, as she thought, had forgotten her easily, giving his love to this other maiden. Brynhild, with her Valkyrie's pride, was left with a mighty anger in her heart. "Why dost thou speak so to me, Brynhild?" Gudrun asked. "It would be ill indeed if drops from thy hair fell on one who is so much above thee, one who is King Gunnar's wife." Brynhild answered, "Thou art married to a king, but not to one more valorous than my lord." Gudrun said, "Gunnar is more valorous. Why dost thou compare Sigurd with him?" Brynhild said, "He slew the dragon Fafnir, and won for himself Fafnir's hoard," said Gudrun. "Gunnar rode through the ring of fire. Mayhap thou wilt tell us that Sigurd did the like," said Brynhild. "Yea," said Gudrun, now made angry. "It was Sigurd, and not Gunnar, who rode through the ring of fire. He rode through it in Gunnar's shape, and he took the ring off thy finger. Look, it is now on mine." And Gudrun held out her hand on which was Andvari's ring. Then Brynhild knew, all at once, that what Gudrun said was true. It was Sigurd that rode through the ring of fire, the second as well as the first time. It was he who had struggled with her, taking the ring off her hand and claiming her for a bride, not for himself but for another, and out of disdain. Falsely had she been won, and she, one of Odin's Valkyries, had been wed to one who was not the bravest hero in the world, and she to whom untruth might not come had been deceived. She was silent now, and all the pride that was in her turned to hatred of Sigurd. She went to Gunnar her husband, and she told him that she was so deeply shamed that she could never be glad in his hall again, that never would he see her drinking wine, nor embroidering with golden threads, and never would he hear her speaking words of kindness. And when she said this to him, she rent the web she was weaving, and she wept aloud so that all in the hall heard her, and all marveled to hear the proud queen cry. Then Sigurd came to her, and he offered in atonement the whole hoard of Fafnir. And he told her how forgetfulness of her had come upon him, and he begged her to forgive him for winning her in falseness. But she answered him, "Too late thou hast come to me, Sigurd. Now I have only a great anger in my heart." When Gunnar came, she told him she would forgive him, and love him as she had not loved him before, if he would slay Sigurd. But Gunnar would not slay him, although Brynhild's passion moved him greatly, since Sigurd was a sworn brother of his. Then she went to Högni and asked him to slay Sigurd, telling him that the whole of Fafnir's hoard would belong to the Nibelungs if Sigurd were slain. But Högni would not slay him, since Sigurd and he were sworn brothers. There was one who had not sworn brotherhood with Sigurd. He was Guttorm, Gunnar's and Högni's half brother. Brynhild went to Guttorm. He would not slay Sigurd, but Brynhild found that he was infirm of will and unsteady of thought. With Guttorm, then, she would work for the slaying of Sigurd. Her mind was fixed that he and she would no longer be in the world of men. She made a dish of madness for Guttorm's serpent's venom and wolf's flesh mixed, and when he had eaten it, Guttorm was crazed. Then did he listen to Brynhild's words, and she commanded him to go into the chamber where Sigurd slept and stab him through the body with a sword. This Guttorm did, but Sigurd, before he gasped out his life, took Gram, his great sword, and flung it at Guttorm and cut him in twain. And Brynhild, knowing what deed was done, went without and came to where Grani, Sigurd's proud horse, was standing. She stayed there with her arms across Grani's neck, the Valkyrie leaning across the horse that was born of Odin's horse. And Grani stood listening for some sound. He heard the cries of Gudrun over Sigurd, and then his heart burst and he died. They bore Sigurd out of the hall, and Brynhild went beside where they placed him. She took a sword and put it through her own heart. Thus died Brynhild, who had been made a mortal woman for her disobedience to the will of Odin, and who was won to be a mortal's wife by a falseness. They took Sigurd and his horse Grani, and his helmet and his golden gear, and they left all on a great painted ship. They could not but leave Brynhild beside him, Brynhild with her wondrous hair and her stern and beautiful face. They left the two together and launched the ship on the sea. And when the ship was on the water, they fired it, and Brynhild once again lay in the flames. And so Sigurd and Brynhild went together to join Baldur and Nanna in Hela's habitation. Gunnar and Högni came to dread the evil that was in the hoard. They took the gleaming and glittering mass, and they brought it to the river along which, ages before, Hreidmar had his smithy and the dwarf, and Vari his cave. From a rock in the river they cast the gold and jewels into the water, and the hoard of Andvari sank for ever beneath the waves. Then the river maidens had possession again of their treasure. But not for long were they to guard it and to sing over it, for now the season that was called the Fimbul winter was coming over the earth, and Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, was coming to the dwellers in Asgard. Section Roman 4, Chapter 10. The twilight of the gods' snow fell on the 4 quarters of the world. Icy winds blew from every side. The sun and the moon were hidden by storms. It was the Fimbul winter. No spring came and no summer. No autumn brought harvest or fruit, and winter grew into winter again. There was 3 years' winter. The first was called the winter of winds. Storms blew and snows drove down, and frosts were mighty. The children of men might hardly keep alive in that dread winter. The second winter was called the winter of the sword. Those who were left alive amongst men robbed and slew for what was left to feed on. Brother fell on brother and slew him, and over all the world there were mighty battles. And the third winter was called the winter of the wolf. Then the ancient witch who lived in Jarnvid, the iron wood, fed the wolf Managarm on unburied men, and on the corpses of those who fell in battle. Mightily grew and flourished the wolf that was to be the devourer of Mani, the moon. The champions in Valhalla would find their seats splashed with the blood that Managarm dashed from his jaws. This was a sign to the gods that the time of the last battle was approaching. A cock crew, far down in the bowels of the earth, he was, and beside Hela's habitation. The rusty, red cock of Hel crew, and his crowing made a stir in the lower worlds. In Jotunheim a cock crew, Fioler, the crimson cock, and at his crowing the giants aroused themselves. High up in Asgard a cock crew, the golden cock Gullinkambir, and at his crowing the champions in Valhalla bestirred themselves. A dog barked. Deep down in the earth a dog barked. It was Garm, the hound with bloody mouth, barking in Nipa's cave. The dwarfs who heard groaned before their doors of stone. The tree Yggdrasil moaned in all its branches. There was a rending noise as the giants moved their ship. There was a trampling sound as the hosts of Muspelheim gathered their horses. But Jotunheim and Muspelheim and Hel waited tremblingly. It might be that Fenrir the wolf might not burst the bonds wherewith the gods had bound him. Without his being loosed, the gods might not be destroyed. And then was heard the rending of the rock, as Fenrir broke loose. For the second time the hound Garm barked in Nipa's cave. Then was heard the galloping of the horses of the riders of Muspelheim. Then was heard the laughter of Loki. Then was heard the blowing of Heimdall's horn. Then was heard the opening of Valhalla's 540 doors, as 800 champions made ready to pass through each door. Odin took counsel with Mimir's head. Up from the waters of the well of wisdom he drew it, and by the power of the runes he knew he made the head speak to him. Where best might the Aesir and the Vanir and the Einherjar, who were the champions of Midgard, meet, and how best might they strive with the forces of Muspelheim and Jotunheim and Hel. The head of Mimir counselled Odin to meet them on Vigard plain, and to wage there such war that the powers of evil would be destroyed forever, even though his own world should be destroyed with them. The riders of Muspelheim reached Bifrost, the rainbow bridge. Now would they storm the city of the gods and fill it with flame. But Bifrost broke under the weight of the riders of Muspelheim, and they came not to the city of the gods. Jörmungand, the serpent that encircles the world, reared itself up from the sea. The waters flooded the lands, and the remnant of the world's inhabitants was swept away. That mighty flood floated Naglfar, the ship of nails that the giants were so long building, and floated the ship of Hel also. With Hreimr the giant steering it, Naglfar sailed against the gods, with all the powers of Jotunheim aboard. And Loki steered the ship of Hel with the wolf Fenrir upon it, for the place of the last battle. Since Bifrost was broken, the Aesir and the Vanir, the Asinir and the Vana, the Einherjar and the Valkyries rowed downward to Vigard through the waters of Thund. Odin rode at the head of his champions. His helmet was of gold, and in his hand was his spear Gungnir. Thor and Tyr were in his company. In Myrkvid, the dark forest, the Vanir stood against the host of Muspelheim. From the broken end of the rainbow bridge the riders came, all flashing and flaming, with fire before them and after them. Njord was there with Skadi, his giant wife, fierce in her ward. Res, Freya was there also, and Frey had Gerda beside him as a battle maiden. Terribly bright flashed Surtur's sword. No sword ever owned was as bright as his, except the sword that Frey had given to Skirnir. Frey and Surtur fought. He perished. Frey perished in that battle, but he would not have perished if he had had in his hand his own magic sword. And now, for the third time, Garm, the hound with blood upon his jaws, barked. He had broken loose on the world, and with fierce bounds he rushed toward Vigard Plain, where the gods had assembled their powers. Loud barked Garm. The eagle Hrisvelgr screamed on the edge of heaven. Then the skies were cloven, and the tree Yggdrasil was shaken in all its roots. To the place where the gods had drawn up, their ranks came the ship of Jotunheim and the ship of Hel. Came the riders of Muspelheim and Garm, the hound with blood upon his jaws. And out of the sea that now surrounded the plain of Vigard, the serpent Jörmungand came. What said Odin to the gods and to the champions who surrounded him? We will give our lives and let our world be destroyed, but we will battle so that these evil powers will not live after us. Out of Hel's ship sprang Fenrir the wolf. His mouth gaped, his lower jaw hung against the earth, and his upper jaw scraped the sky. Against the wolf Odin All-Father fought. Thor might not aid him, for Thor had now to encounter Jörmungand, the monstrous serpent. By Fenrir the wolf Odin was slain. But the younger gods were now advancing to the battle, and Vidar, the silent god, came face to face with Fenrir. He laid his foot on the wolf's lower jaw, that foot that had on the sandal made of all the scraps of leather that shoemakers had laid by for him, and with his hands he seized the upper jaw and tore his gullet. Thus died Fenrir, the fiercest of all the enemies of the gods. Jörmungand, the monstrous serpent, would have overwhelmed all with the venom he was ready to pour forth. But Thor sprang forward and crushed him with a stroke of his hammer Mjolnir. Then Thor stepped back 9 paces. But the serpent blew his venom over him, and blinded and choked and burnt. Thor, the world's defender, perished. Loki sprang from his ship and strove with Heimdall, the warder of the rainbow bridge and the watcher for the gods. Loki slew Heimdall and was slain by him. Bravely fought Tyr, the god who had sacrificed his sword hand for the binding of the wolf. Bravely he fought, and many of the powers of evil perished by his strong left hand. But Garm, the hound with bloody jaws, slew Tyr. And now the riders of Muspelheim came down on the field. Bright and gleaming were all their weapons. Before them and behind them went wasting fires. Surtur cast fire upon the earth. The tree Yggdrasil took fire and burned in all its great branches. The world tree was wasted in the blaze. But the fearful fire that Surtur brought on the earth destroyed him and all his host. The wolf Hati caught up on Sol, the sun. The wolf Managarm seized on Mani, the moon. They devoured them. Stars fell, and darkness came down on the world. The seas flowed over the burnt and wasted earth, and the skies were dark above the sea, for Sol and Mani were no more. But at last the seas drew back, and earth appeared again, green and beautiful. A new sun and a new moon appeared in the heavens, one a daughter of Sol, and the other a daughter of Mani. No grim wolves kept them in pursuit. 4 of the younger gods stood on the highest of the world's peaks. They were Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin, and Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. Modi and Magni found Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and with it they slew the monsters that still rage through the world, the hound Garm and the wolf Managarm. Vidar and Vali found in the grass the golden tablets on which were inscribed the runes of wisdom of the elder gods. The runes told them of a heaven that was above Asgard, of Gimli, that was untouched by Surtur's fire. Vili and Vi, will and holiness, ruled in it. Baldur and Herdjur came from Hela's habitation, and the gods sat on the peak together and held speech with each other, calling to mind the secrets and the happenings they had known before Ragnarök. The twilight of the gods, deep in a wood 2 of humankind were left. The fire of Surtur did not touch them. They slept, and when they wakened the world was green and beautiful again. These 2 fed on the dews of the morning. A woman and a man they were, Lif and Lifthrasir. They walked abroad in the world, and from them and from their children came the men and women who spread themselves over the earth. And now the Norse story of the Children of Odin is completed.